Velina mai, halo okolta, nisa bula vinaka, rananin, talofa lava, yoko e yuk, malo elele, kia orana, mogatin, taloha ni, ali, kona maori, lenwo, hafaadai, fakalofa, yahiatu, kasalele, and warm Pacific Island greetings. My name is Catherine Brockway, and I will be your host for today's seminar. I work as a senior sustainability analyst at the United Nations Seafowl Center at Chaminade University and as the strategy director for the ALL-SPICE Alliance. The Laha Seminar Series is co-hosted by the NSF ALL-SPICE Includes Alliance, Chaminade University of Honolulu, and the Pacific Islands Development Forum at the East-West Center. The purpose of the series is to share ideas around data justice with a general audience across the Pacific and the United States. Data justice includes topics such as data sovereignty, underrepresentation in data sets, data aggregation and suppression, data privacy, data ethics, culturally appropriate data collection and reporting, and broadening participation in data-related workforces and education programs. The Laha Seminar is typically held on the last Thursday of each month from 12:30 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. The Laha Seminar team supports and participates in the global Thursdays in Black movement, which denounces gender-based violence in all its forms and in all parts of the world. We wear black on Thursdays in solidarity with all survivors of gender-based violence. We will add a link in the chat to a video that provides more information about Thursdays in Black within the Pacific context. We will be using the Q&A feature in today's seminar to collect questions from the audience for our speakers, which we will address at the end of our time together. Since we have two wonderful speakers today, we may have limited time for Q&A in today's webinar, but we'll do our best to address your questions either in the webinar or afterwards. Please add your questions at any time, and we will try to address as many as we can. For today's webinar, the Pacific Islands Development Program, in partnership with the Center for Pacific Island Studies at the University of Hawaiʻi at Mānoa, offers a workshop to center Micronesian knowledge and expertise and address historical and contemporary justice issues. This session will help participants understand and support people from the region of Micronesia, focusing on an overview of the region and culturally sustaining practices based on an understanding of key Micronesian cultural norms and delivering professional practices in ways that support those norms while promoting success. Our speakers today, starting with Brilyn Aguilar. Bri is a Chamorro Filipina girl from Guahan, a descendant of the Alejo, Budoki, Carabao, and Mānoa clans. She was raised to hold profound respect for culture and community, especially that of her indigenous Pacific heritage. Bri has always been interested in the arts and the human condition and is passionate about sharing stories and making positive differences in marginalized communities through the arts. It is her lifelong goal to be constantly learning and establish spaces aimed towards collaboration, creation, and communication in order to resist and challenge the stigmas faced in our island communities through education and cultural practice. Currently, Bri is a Carrying Culture Graduate Assistant with the Center for Pacific Island Studies at the University of Hawaiʻi at Mānoa. In this role, Bri is collaborating with the Pacific Islands Development Program on curriculum to help Hawaii Department of Education K-12 instructors better understand the perspectives of Micronesian students and families. Bri is currently pursuing a master's degree in Pacific Island Studies at the University of Hawaiʻi at Mānoa. Our second speaker is Carol Ann Carl. She is a Puiladak and Pohnpei storyteller and writer who lives and does research from Oahu under the auspices of her Hanai grandmother, the Aina of Hawaii. Her life's work is rooted in Pohnpeian thought, culture, and practice of history. It aims to enlighten and shed light and deepen the relationships and cultural intersections of Hawaii, Pohnpei, and Greater Micronesia in celebration and transformation of Oceania and its future. Now I am excited to give the floor to our first speaker today, Bri Aguilar.
Hello. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge with deep gratitude and respect the Kanaka Maoli, the ancestral stewards of this land I'm on today. Hafa and aloha, everybody. Again, my name is Brilyn Aguilar. I'm a daughter of Gohan from the Alejo, Bodoki, Monok, and Carabao clans. And I bring with me here today the spirit of my ancestors from across the vast Pacifico. Sindankala Nasiduas Maasi for allowing me this opportunity to speak before you all today. Currently, I'm a Pacific Island Studies student, as mentioned, and my role is to assist the Center for Pacific Island Studies and PIDP in this Carrying Cultures Micronesia project. Dr. James Viernes and Dr. Mary Hattori have put their hearts and souls into laying the foundations for this presentation, so I'll do my best to honor their efforts. Let me go ahead and start sharing my presentation with you all. Oh, there we go. Alrighty. So this presentation offers a very general overview of the historical and political context of Micronesia. But before we get into the specifics, let's look at a little bit of the history of Oceania. Around 8,000 years ago, a culturally distinct group with southern Mongoloid features settled along China's southern coast. And by 6,000 years ago, they migrated across the ocean to Taiwan, where their languages evolved into Proto-Austronesian. These settlers later expanded south to the Philippines and then further west and southwest to regions like Vietnam, Borneo, and Java, as well as areas south of the Philippines, including Sulawesi and New Guinea. The Austronesian language family, with around 1,000 languages, accounts for 20% of the world's languages and is spoken by about 386 million people today. It spans the Philippines, Indonesia, Madagascar, Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. By 4,000 years ago, the distinct Melanesian, Micronesian, and Polynesian cultures and languages began to form, reflecting the Austronesian expansion and cultural evolutions across vast maritime regions. When people hear about Micronesia, there's a common misconception that because it was one of the last Pacific regions to be prominently featured in Western writings, it must be the newest in terms of existence and settlement. However, according to the dominant out-of-Taiwan theory, Micronesia was where the open ocean exploration of the Pacific began, specifically with Palau and the Marianas being settled and explored by people of the Austronesian linguistic family over 4,000 years ago. Micronesia is culturally divided into three main regions. The Western Division includes the Marianas, Yap, and Palau. The Central Division encompasses the Federated States of Micronesia, and the Eastern Division comprises the Marshall Islands, Nauru, and Kiribati. Micronesia is culturally more diverse than Polynesia, but less so than Melanesia. Its settlement involved multiple migration waves from the southwest and southeast. Palau was already settled as early as 4,500 years ago, predating the Lapita culture in Melanesia and Polynesia. A second wave reached the Marianas, Palau, Yap, and Nauru around 3,300 years ago. Central and eastern Micronesia were settled later, with Kiribati around 2,200 years ago, followed by the Marshall Islands, Chuuk, Koshrai, and Pohnpei between 2,000 and 1,500 years ago. This period is marked by the spread of Lapita pottery from 1500 to 500 BCE across Austronesian settlements. Micronesia consists of several chains of about 3,000 islands spanning 7.4 million square kilometers of the Pacific Ocean. These islands, mostly low coral atolls, present significant challenges for habitation due to their susceptibility to droughts, typhoons, and difficult cultivation conditions compounded by their supposed isolation. It was Ferdinand Magellan and Juan Sebastian Elcano's trans-Pacific voyage in 1520 and 1521 that initiated a series of subsequent European explorations. This was the age of European discovery. In the 16th century, Spain and Portugal's purpose was to control and convert. And then in the 17th century, the English and the Dutch's purpose was for trade and profit. And then in the 18th century, Russia and France's purposes was to expand knowledge and commerce. Here's the timeline of colonial control of Guahan and the rest of Micronesia. With Spain's claim to Guahan in 1668, this marked the first instance of colonization in the entire Pacific. After the Spanish-American War, Guahan was ceded to the US and the rest of Micronesia was sold to Germany, marking the crucial split of Guahan from the rest of the region. After the end of World War I, Japan gained control of German Micronesia. And during World War II, Guahan was invaded by the Imperial Japanese Army on December 8, 1941, shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Japanese immediately renamed the island Omiyajima, or Great Shine Island. The Japanese military occupation of Guahan lasted from 1941 to 1944. And then after the Battle of Guahan began on July 21st, 1944, with American troops landing on the western side of the island after several weeks of pre-invasion bombardment by the US Navy. After several weeks of heavy fighting, the Japanese forces officially surrendered on August 10, 1944. The United States later assumed control over the remainder of the Micronesian region by way of the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands, otherwise known as the TCPI, a trusteeship under the newly formed United Nations. Through the system, a UN member state was assigned the responsibility of administering territories whose people have not yet attained a full measure of self-government. The purpose of the system was to promote the political, economic, social, and educational advancements of the inhabitants of the trust territories and the progressive development towards self-governance and independence. During the TTPI period administered by the United States, significant changes began to occur within the islands through what the Americans called benevolent assimilation. Education systems centered around island traditions were replaced by Western-style schools, which emphasized democratic values. And in 1966, Peace Corps volunteers began arriving, and U.S. federal programs aimed at low-income families were introduced, including job training, food subsidies for youth and the elderly, and housing assistance. However, these Western programs and regulations were culturally misaligned and harmful to traditional ways of life. As government jobs increased, populations began relocating from outer islands to central areas, drawn by the growing opportunities in government employment. This expansion led to the creation of a vast government bureaucracy, fostering a dependence on cash economy and imported goods. Additionally, the United States conducted 67 tests on Bikini and Enewetak atolls in the Marshall Islands from 1946 to 1958. Several tests on Kiribati Island in Kiribati from the late 1950s to early 1960s, and a series of atmospheric and high-altitude nuclear explosions on Kalama Island, otherwise known as Johnson Atoll, from 1958 until 1975. Enewetak Atoll in the Marshall Islands also underwent dramatic physical, environmental, and cultural transformations as the result of the 44 nuclear tests conducted on that atoll. In 1947, the United States relocated people of Enewetak to Ujulang Atoll to the west, where they struggled to live for several decades with scarce food supplies and harsh weather conditions. In 1977, the United States initiated a massive cleanup project on Enewetak that included the removal and storage of radioactive debris on Runa Island, which still exists today. The United States then began the resettlement and restoration of Enewetak, which also continues to this day. The Bikinians were not the only people in the Marshall Islands affected by the U.S. nuclear program. In fact, wind conditions on March 1st, 1954 carried nuclear fallout from Castle Bravo test across the Marshall Islands and had a severe impact on the people of Rongelap Atoll in particular. U.S. officials did not evacuate people from Rongelap for several days after the Bravo test. Despite the high levels of radiation present on Rongelap, for example, the United States allowed people to return to the atoll in 1957. The Bravo test was 1,000 times larger than the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. With Micronesians actively taking agency in political administration, efforts were made to define the region's status. In 1964, the Congress of Micronesia was formally established. In 1967, the Political Status Commission was formed to debate possible futures such as free association, independence, integration, or to keep the status quo. In 1969, CNMI discussions began with Commonwealth status gained in 1975. In 1986, COFA was signed into law for the Marshall Islands and FSM, and in 1994, COFA with Palau was approved. Here are the current political statuses of U.S.-affiliated jurisdictions, which include sovereign nations, Commonwealth, and territories. Territories are non-autonomous, meaning we do not directly govern ourselves. Within Micronesia, the territories Guahan and CNMI each have a single representative in U.S. Congress, however, they have no voting rights. Additionally, citizens of Guahan, CNMI, despite being U.S. citizens, do not have the right to vote for presidential leadership. The provisions of COFA agreements were as follows. Perpetual strategic denial. The U.S. may operate armed forces in compact nations, may negotiate for land to operate bases, and may exclude the militaries of other nations from the region. The U.S. is responsible for protecting nations and administering international defense treaties, but it may not declare war on behalf of these nations. The rationale behind unlimited entry allowance of freely associated state citizens was to establish exclusive and mutually beneficial relations between the United States and compact nations. In exchange for unlimited immigration and economic assistance, the United States received unrestricted and exclusive access to their lands and waterways for strategic purposes. The second compact calls for U.S. financial assistance over a 20-year period that began in the fiscal year 2004 and ends this fiscal year 2024. It's important to note that members of COFA nations are provided visa-free entry as non-immigrants and work eligibility without employment authorization documents in the U.S. The eligibility for particular U.S. federal programs like the Federal Aviation Administration, the U.S. Postal Service, the National Weather Service, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and Federal Communications Commission, and various public health and education programs. Furthermore, an economic package totaling $3.6 billion was provided over 20 years from 2004 to 2023, with $1.5 billion allocated to the Republic of the Marshall Islands, $2.1 billion to the Federated States of Micronesia, and an additional $229 million is set aside for Palau from 2010 to 2024. The recent COFA renewals included the extension of economic assistance to the Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, and Palau. The renewal maintained unchanged provisions related to defense, security, migration, and other areas. The agreements involve grant assistance and trust fund contributions totaling approximately $2.3 billion for the Marshall Islands, $3.3 billion for FSM, and $0.9 billion for Palau for the three countries from fiscal year 2024 to fiscal year 2043. The compact assistance now includes enhanced support for environmental initiatives, climate change adaptation, healthcare, education, and infrastructure. The COFA amendments also allowed expanded access to the Department of Veterans Affairs health services for FAST veterans and made FAST migrants to the United States eligible for federal programs, whereas previously they did not qualify for these services. Citizens of the RMI, FSM, and Palau are eligible for some U.S. federal programs and services, with over 1,000 FAST citizens serving in the United States Armed Forces. Looking at this map, here's some information on the Micronesian experience in the U.S. Many FAST students and their families have found success in post-secondary education and career fields over decades of migration to and from Hawaii, including jobs in government, healthcare, interpretation, and construction. Nearly 1 out of every 3 FSM citizens lives outside of the Federated States of Micronesia. Students from freely associated states make up more than 25% of the Guam Department of Education student population. Working together to sustain cultural practices in a new context, a group of Pohnpeians in Kansas City formed a chiefdom, or a place-based organized social system, to serve the estimated 1,000 Pohnpeians living in the area. Springdale, Arkansas is home to the largest population of Marshallese in the mainland United States, with estimates of between 6,000 and 15,000 Marshallese living in Northwest Arkansas and the neighboring region. Pacific Islander students total about 12% of the entire Springdale School District. And Palau has one of the highest positive net migration rates in the Pacific region, meaning that more Palauans are returning to Palau than the number who outmigrate. Within the region of Micronesia, we have divergent worldviews, and this affects Micronesians in part because of the prefix micro in the problematic word Micronesian. There are Micronesians here, at home and abroad, who serve as lawyers, healthcare providers, educators, community leaders, and so much more. Many of us have left our homes in search of education, healthcare, and security. While some of us still hold on to the hope and dream of making our return, much like how our ancestors did, not all of us are granted that privilege. While many of us see us coming from tiny resource-poor and isolated rocks, we do not ourselves operate with such a limited worldview. We do not limit our understanding of the world and our identities to the boundaries of the lands which we come from. We embrace Epeli Hau'ofa's oceanic people's perspective that we occupy an ocean of islands rather than the outsider's view of Pacific Island nations as islands in a far sea. We are not from tiny islands in a far sea. We are from a sea of islands. With that said, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Center for Pacific Island Studies teaching resources website that was put together by Dr. Foley Falsgraf. The Center for Pacific Island Studies in the University of Hawaiʻi at Manoa's School of Pacific and Asian Studies is a larger home for initiatives that bring together people and resources to promote an understanding of the Pacific Islands and issues of concern to Pacific Islanders. The center partners with the Departments of Public Pacific Island Studies, which offers an innovative instructional program that is regional, comparative, and interdisciplinary in nature. The resource site was created with support from the National Resource Center for Pacific Islands grant provided by the U.S. Department of Education, and we hope that the information contained on these pages continues to expand our collective understanding in Oceania. So this is the landing page of the website, and in the drop-down menu at the upper right-hand corner, you can find the Resources tab and the Carrying Cultures Micronesia tab. Within this website, you could find resources like the Oceania Current podcast, hosted by Dr. Tara Kabutalaka and Kenji Cataldo, CPIS publications like the Contemporary Pacific and Pacific Islands Monograph Series, as well as various maps of the region and other educational resources pertaining to the Pacific. A big part of this website initiative is the Carrying Cultures Micronesia project. In their work with Micronesian students schools across the state are presently struggling with the challenges posed by cultural differences, poverty, accompanying strains on family support structures, and pervasive prejudice against Micronesians. Justin Davies, curriculum designer, and Dr. Mary Hartori, director of the Pacific Islands Development Program, created the Carrying Cultures Micronesia Teacher Professional Development course to provide teachers with insights into the cultures of Micronesia, context around Micronesian migration to Hawaii, and active learning strategies that help students to sustain their cultural and linguistic heritage. This program is funded by a grant from the Hawaii Council for Humanities through support from the National Endowment for the Humanities and developed with support from the U.S. Department of Education National Resource Center, which program supports higher education area and international studies. Each tab, a little technical difficulties, there we go. Each tab brings you to an ever-evolving list of resources like creative works and the artists behind them, and information about some of the different languages within Micronesia. information on military presence and strategies, as well as info on the environment and climate change, and geography and navigation resources such as a digital atlas of Micronesia and cultural community insights from sources like film and documentaries. So here is our QR code that will link you to the website. Should you have any further questions or recommendations, please reach out to either myself or Dr. Foley Falsgraf, the Outreach Director at CPIS. And then here is some of the resources, a code to some of the resources that are in this presentation. And then lastly, Andankala Nasidos Ma'asi and Mahalo Nui once again for this opportunity to speak before you today. Despite the traumas and hardships brought upon by our islands and our people by colonial hands, we Micronesians have been relentless in our survivance. We are an ancient people, some of the first to venture into the unknown, guided by the celestial and the current, fueled by dreams and need. Today, we continue to navigate the globe in hopes of reaching fruitful futures where our children do not have to defend the validity of our existence or cling onto the notions of resilience. And as we always have done, we will rise to the challenge and we will not drown because there's nothing micro about Micronesia. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Bri, for that very informative and inspiring talk. I'm very excited about all of the resources that you have shared with us today. And there is a link in the chat to a Google folder that will give everyone access to Bri's slides and some of the resources she shared. Now I'd like to invite Carol Ann to continue with her presentation.
Kasalelia o aloha kako. I've worn many hats, but today I wear the hat of a storyteller. Today, I plan to tell you many stories. But really, I'm here to tell you one story, a macrocosm of microcosms, or a constellation of stories, if you will. Each of these stories, each of these stars illuminates the other. By the end of this presentation, I hope you'll be able to find your place in this constellation. The most important story a storyteller carries is the story of themselves, who they are, where they come from, and where they need to go. In this first story, I'm going to share three major names: name, home, ancestor. I will ask you what they are and invite you to use the chat to answer. Let's see if we can listen as intently as our ancestors expect us to. Kasalelia, my name is Carol Ann Carl, and home for me is the beautiful island of Pohnpei in the Federated States of Micronesia. Pohnpei, one state of four that make up one island nation, beautiful islands where people come to dive, surf, and hike on their vacation, one nation of five that makes up the entire Micronesian region. Give me a moment, let me try to clear the common misconceptions. We have the Yapese, the Koshayan, the Pohnpeian, the Chukis. The Federated States of Micronesia is just one country. You see, we have the Marshall Islands to the east and Palau to the west. We are the Kofa migrants, Hawaii's newest wave of immigrants. Down south, we have Nauru and Kiribati at the end. Up north, we have the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands and Guam, where America's day begins. Yes, the Marianas are not island nations, they're US territories, but in Micronesian waters, they are a part of our inventory, so although I feel hesitant, I will claim them in my story. Because for too long have we been claimed by foreign powers that we have forgotten who we are. Vast stretches of ocean meant to connect us, now making us seem too far. Sometimes it's forgotten that we are one region of three: Melanesia, Micronesia, Polynesia, Pacific Island beauty. Shh. We have been shushed by foreign labels, Pacific Islands, they say. But when foreigners say Pacific, do they really understand my way? I come from the island of Pohnpei, where on the other side of yesterday, across the oceans of Oceania, my ancestors would navigate. On the other side of yesterday, my ancestors had a vision of a new place they could call home, the lagoon of life, an island risen, a crew of 15 members, 9 women and 6 men. I speak their names to life in need of their guiding presence. Sutakono Perenu and the prophet Sapkani, Langperen Sopelata and his brother Sopeleti. The 9 women were Liolele, Lian Kachauchuk, Lioromenpuel, Lupak Takalang, Litorkani, Lipalkani, Lisapkani, Lisaramenpuel. A canoe handcrafted by pivotal women whose presence, as the story goes, would conjure wind for the voyage. Even on my own life's journey, these women are the seed of my strength, my courage. Along their voyage, an octopus would point them in the direction they seek. Lo and behold, they found the exposed reef. Here they stacked rocks to build an altar in praise. Upon a stone altar is the literal translation of my island's name, Pohnpei. For upon that stone altar, my island was built so that more people could voyage to it and navigate more still. The clans came later, calling this island their home, embedding themselves deeply rooted in stone for at least 2,000 years. My culture has thrived. Despite decades of foreign power, my culture is still alive. I walk through megalithic structures. I pay tribute to chiefs, chiak, wow, sar, traditional concepts the English language fails to describe because of its ambiguity. I tell you the origin story of my island because here I want to make something irrevocably clear. My ancestors were navigators, as you've heard this story go. As such, we claim ocean and island as contiguous home. We claim the identity of navigator and along with it, the identity of immigrant. Although I travel by airplane today, I feel the same turbulence. Growing up at Pohnpei, being a navigator was more than just being able to read stars. Being a navigator is about welcoming everyone who travels from near and or far. Pohnpei, my island, is a place for those who come. It does not matter the color of your skin or what language rolls off your tongue. We are navigators, we are immigrants, we are Oceanians. We are one, whether you come to stay or just temporarily. We are obligated to treat you customarily with unsolicited respect, humility, generosity, and kindness. That is what being a navigator, a Pohnpeian that travels, means to me. If I could, I would have stayed home to pursue a higher degree, but because of the systems imposed on my island, here is where I find the opportunity. If I could, I would have stayed home rather than being bombarded by such negativity. Hearing even government officials say, my country is so bad, we choose to come here because being homeless in Hawaii is better than being rich in Micronesia. Really? Home for me is the beautiful island of Pohnpei, where ever since the other side of yesterday, immigrant has been my identity because navigation has been my way, my land, my language, my culture. My heritage is my identity. It is not negligence of one. This is what it means to be from where I come from. Kan roroki irapensap o batbatok batapensap sarawi. Be stewards of the land and passionately breathe life into our oral history. Home for me is the beautiful island of Pohnpei. an island built on an altar of stone. Come to all of Micronesia, where you will be welcomed with open arms, because just like our ancestors, you come to find home. And so now I ask you to put in the chat my name, my home, and who my ancestors were.
And actually, Carol Ann, I think we neglected to give everyone access to the chat, so I apologize for that. But if people would like to add that into the Q&A, we would be happy to add it into the chat for you.
Thank you, Catherine. Amazing. This next story is one from Melanesia, from the island of Tana in Vanuatu, about the tree and the canoe. Its people say that Pacific Islanders, Oceanians, people who consider ocean and island contiguous homes, are the tree and the canoe. As the canoe, we are carved of the tree, navigating across oceans, but we are still very much the tree, rooted in our island homes. We know who we are, where we are, and where we come from. When these two coordinates are unknown, that canoe becomes lost. And so now I invite everybody again to take a step back in time. The region that is Micronesia experienced 4 major periods of imposed colonial administration. First, the Spanish, the Germans, and then the Japanese, who annexed Micronesia as mandated by the League of Nations, putting Japan in a strategic military position. On December 7th, 1941, thanks to this strategic position, the Japanese would bomb Pearl Harbor, the location of the US's largest naval ghost fleet at the time. Japan's largest naval base at the time was located in Chuuk, also known as Truk Atoll. On February 17, 1944, in retaliation to Pearl Harbor, the US conducted what is known as Operation Hailstone, a massive, devastating United States air and surface attack on Chuuk Lagoon. 5 fleet carriers, 4 light carriers, carrying more than 500 warplanes, along with 7 battleships and numerous heavy cruisers, light cruisers, destroyers, and submarines, bombed Japanese fleets, airfields, and main installations across the region. Chuuk Lagoon today is one of the top 10 dive sites in the world, not because of its pristine coral reefs, but because of the massive World War II graveyard that lay within. The US seized the region by force. The atomic bombs, Little Man and Fat Boy, were launched on Nagasaki and Hiroshima from an airfield in Tinian in the Northern Marianas in August of 1945. The US, by mandate of the United Nations, stayed and administered the region as a strategic trust territory, known as the US Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands, or simply known to many of us, TTPI. TTPI was made up of 6, which later became 7 districts: the Northern Marianas, Palau, the Marshall Islands, Pohnpei, Yap, Chuuk, and Quashai. Having been ruled by outside powers for so long, Micronesia's leaders pushed to define their own independence. The resulting makeup of the districts is as follows. The Northern Mariana Islands became a commonwealth, joining their sister Guahan as a second U.S. territory in the region. The remaining districts became 3 separate independent nations in free association with the U.S. The Republic of Palau, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Federated States of Micronesia. Before they were in free association, They were sovereign nations first, each nation ratifying their own constitution. I want to read to you as this next story, the preamble of the Constitution of the Federated States of Micronesia, where I'm from. We, the people of Micronesia, exercising our inherent sovereignty, do hereby establish this Constitution of the Federated States of Micronesia. With this Constitution, we affirm our common wish to live together in peace and harmony, to preserve the heritage of the past, and to protect the promise of the future. To make one nation of many islands, we respect the diversity of our cultures. Our differences enrich us. The seas bring us together. They do not separate us. Our islands sustain us. Our island nation enlarges us and makes us stronger. Our ancestors who made their homes on these islands displaced no other people. We who remain wish no other home than this. Having known war, we hope for peace. Having been divided, we wish unity. Having been ruled, we seek freedom. Micronesia began in the days when man explored seas in rafts and canoes. The Micronesian nation is born in an age when men voyage among stars. Our world itself is an island. We extend to all nations what we seek from each: peace, friendship, cooperation, and love in our common humanity. With this Constitution, we who have been wards of other nations become the proud guardian of our islands now and forever. Knowing who we are, where we are, and where we come from in order to define where we need to go. And from there, the three nations began negotiations on their individual compacts of free association. So what is the compact? Defined, it's an international bilateral agreement establishing and governing the relationship of free association between the US and a Micronesian sovereign state. There exist three: one with the US and the FSM, one with the US and the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and one with the US and the Republic of Palau. Each is very distinct in the priorities and benefits outlined and negotiated by the citizens of each of these three sovereign nations. In general, though very nuanced, apologies. In general, though each are very nuanced, they can be summarized into these two major agreements: the subsidiary agreement and the tertiary agreement. The tertiary agreement grants the US full military strategic authority and responsibility for security and defense matters in or relating to the FSM, and responsibility and authority over our lands, waters, and airspace as needed to conduct activities necessary for security and defense. The subsidiary agreement states the US in this bilateral relationship will assist in helping the nation achieve economic independence in fulfillment of their responsibility mandated by the UN. They will help us build our schools, our hospitals, our public and private sectors. So the premise for visa-free travel becomes clear. We don't have these things. They were destroyed in the war. As we rebuild, we come here for three reasons: education, labor, and healthcare. As an adult, not knowing this history, I had a hard time. Imagine our kids. This next story I share is the story of a lost canoe. And this is where I issue a trigger warning: police violence. And I ask that we take a brief moment of silence. On April 5th, 2021, a Honolulu police officer fired 10 shots into the rear window of a car driven by I Remember Saikap, killing the 16-year-old. This poem was written in response to hateful rhetoric found in one of the most unkind, unsafe places for our kids, the comment section of Instagram. One less cockroach. Prove me wrong. Hate. So much hate. So much misinformed hate, so much cognitive dissonance, so much selective, force-fed ignorance. Why? Why is a 16-year-old child dead? Why was he shot by a public servant sworn to protect? Because he was a criminal. Because he was a young Micronesian Chuukese boy caught in the liminal, misplaced, displaced identity, never Micronesian enough, never Hawaiian enough, never American enough, never colonizer labeled enough. People shown a lens that chooses to see our kids as the problem instead of the systemic socioeconomic barriers that bar them, the same system that says stealing justifies a brown child's death is the very system that does not hold the colonizer accountable for land theft. The same system where we have to constantly reiterate, articulate generational trauma that's race-based is the same system stripping us from our ancestral landscapes, separating us from our indigenous spaces where we can constellate, recenter this boy's diasporic identity, displace his self-hate, teach him that as the owner of a Chuukese Micronesian migrant identity, his existence as a descendant of a navigating society is the extensive culmination of a legacy of people crossing oceans to build relationships and connections. Relationship and connection in order to be adaptable, in order to be resilient. As a Pohnpeian Micronesian migrant woman, I choose to have the audacity to call on those connections my ancestors crossed oceans for. I challenge the relationships that my ancestors and your ancestors forged. Abolish, dismantle, transform. Cross this ocean of liberation and community, rebirth the ocean nation that our ancestors dreamed. For I Remember Saikap, so that we don't have to worry about our future ancestors and the legacies that we're going to leave. For I Remember Saikap, for the young, for the misled, for I Remember Saikap. See, the thing that I need people to understand is we can teach the young misled, but we can't teach the young dead. We can teach the young misled, but we can't teach the young dead. So what can we do to help these lost canoes find their stern? Pinpoint who they are, where they are, and where they come from in order to better understand where they need to go. Toni Morrison once told me to write the stories I wanted to read, create the stories I wanted to tell. This next story is just that. In 2022, with funding from the Young Pacific leaders, my friends, Dr. Nicole Yamase, Desiree Yamase, and I created and co-piloted the Metau Project. The Yamases are from Chuuk and Pohnpei. Metau is the Pohnpeian word for deep or open ocean. Our pilot cohort consisted of 10 Micronesian high school students, Pohnpeian, Chuukese, Quachayan, Yapese, Palauan, and Refalawash. From Kaimuki High School, McKinley High School, Farrington High School, Moanalua High School, and Waipahu High School. The goal was to reconnect our Micronesian youth with their navigational heritage. The story we told them and held them accountable to was the story of Mau Piailuk, Papa Mau, the Micronesian master navigator who was key in the revival of Polynesian voyaging and whose light helped spark the Polynesian cultural renaissance. Guided by Mau's legacy, we fully believed that we needed to teach these kids how to read stars by connecting them with Polynesian and Micronesian master navigators. By what can only be described as ancestral intervention, we realized they needed to learn how to be stars. To possess a shine so bright, its remnants remain long after its supernova, lighting the path for the next generation to come. So, how do canoes become stars? How does wood become fire? Light has to spark matter. Light, matter, fire, light. First, we had to be their light so that they knew they mattered. Every other Saturday, we rented a van, ordered lots of food, and honored their identities as Micronesians in Hawaiʻi, children of the oceans that brought them here and of the land that feeds them. They watched the Papa Mau documentary at the Polynesian Voyaging Society and stepped on the hokulea, helped rebuild a turtle pond, drafted a Micronesian community mural, and met master navigators Uncle Larry Rigatol and Nainoa Thompson, building their networks to build their net worth. Every Saturday in between, they were assigned journal entries to reflect on their experiences. Slowly but surely, we recalibrated their canoes by being the stars and shining light on other stars they could look up to find their way. We took a little bit of light from each of ourselves and a little bit of light from each of our friends, and we gave it to these kids so that they could shine brighter than we could ever imagine. When the Madao project was proposed, one major outcome was anticipated: that participants will become confident Indigenous change makers who are critically conscious of the past and present to transform the social context for a better future. That outcome was thoroughly achieved. The Madao leaders made history at the 14th annual Kualoa Canoe Festival. Hawaii got to see Micronesian kids paddling Micronesian canoes carved by Mau's son around the hokulea. They volunteered to be on featured panels about the Madao project and racial equity at the Celebrate Micronesia Festival, and were graciously welcomed and recognized at the Ramathau graduation, adorned in traditional attire in celebration of their academic accolades. The biggest successes we've seen are directly in line with all four pillars of the Young Pacific Leaders: education, environmental and resource management, civic leadership, and economic and social development. Nainoa once told Nikki, who later told me, that Mau said that a navigator's job is to lead the canoe safely through the storm. We had to overcome the very real socioeconomic challenges that stifle the foundational formation of the four pillars for many Pacific Islander youth across the world. Participants face the aftermaths of displacements, loss of family, forced migration, family separation, and climate change as Typhoon Mawar hit Guam. We tapped into our community's relationships and resources to increase the probability of success for these youth. Of the 10 participants that began this journey, 8 made it to the end. A number that navigators of the past who sailed vast stretches of ocean to find home would be immeasurably proud of. They've gone on to community college, a double major at UH Mānoa, a major star in the hit play Nothing Micro about Micronesia. Light, matter, fire. We helped them pinpoint their stern, connected the canoe back to the tree, providing them a guiding light for who they are, and where they come from, so that they could envision and get to where they needed to go. Ignited their passion so that they could become stars in their own right. And this is where our stories end. This macrocosm of microcosms, this story of perpetual light. And the question I leave you with is this: is your light bright enough to lead them safely through the storm? Rer, kalangan, kasalelia.
Thank you so much, Carol Ann, for sharing those stories. That was really beautiful. I'd like to invite us all to just take a moment to digest some of those stories. We're coming up on the end of our time, but we do have a few minutes. If anyone has any questions or comments that they would like to share, please put it in the Q&A. And Carol Ann, we did get some responses to your prompt earlier about names and homes and ancestors there in the chat, if you'd like to see them.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you everybody for responding.
Andrew shared lovely poem, and thank you for sharing. We also have some links in the chat for everyone to continue to explore. So we have several links to different projects, some links to videos about some of the issues that have been brought up today. I think I saw a hand raised. That person would like to add their question or comment in the chat, that would be great. I am also going to put my email in the chat, and if anyone has questions about anything that was discussed today, I would be happy to pass them along to our wonderful speakers and make any connections that we can based on what we learned about today. And I think we are about at our time, sadly, but I'd like to close our time together with a really big thank you to our speakers, Brilyn Aguilar and Carol Ann Carl. Thank you to our tech crew from PIDP working behind the scenes, and thank you very much to our audience for sharing this time. Our next Laha seminar will be at the same time on October 31st, so please consider joining us again. Thank you and take care until our next seminar. We're getting lots of thank yous in the chat, in the Q&A. Michelle says she really appreciated the image and the saying about the tree and the canoe. It's very beautiful. And thank you, Brilyn, for amazing maps and info. If you have a chance, please complete an evaluation form about our seminar. We're always trying to improve and serve our audience better. And we hope to see you at our next seminar. Everybody have a great rest of your day.